Hello, and welcome to Senior Code Review Buddy. My name is Chris, and today I'm going to talk about why I think you should try writing your tests first. And it's not because of test-driven development. Instead, I think you might benefit from writing your tests first because it means you have to actually think about how you're going to test your changes. I think there tends to be a common approach amongst developers, myself included, that you start by working on the production code. And after it's working, then you'll add tests. One of the challenges that you can run into with this approach, though, is that after you've made the required change, you realize you don't know how to test it. I don't mean that you've forgotten how to write unit tests, but that the test isn't something that's easy to check with an assert in the unit test. Your change didn't change a return value of a function. So how do you test it? Two quick examples of how this could happen is you could change what text is getting written to the screen, or you could change which database a function's querying. At this point, there are two basic paths to choose from if you want to add tests. The first path is to figure out how to capture those changes for your test. Maybe you can capture all of the standard output and do string comparisons. Or you're using mocks for the database, so you can examine something there and make sure that the right database is getting called. And yeah, it all works. But this approach can be fragile. Your tests maybe aren't using a sort of agreed upon interface. So it's possible that in the future, the production code changes in a way that doesn't break their functionality or non-test interface, but it does break your tests. Path 2 is to go back and change your code so that the interface exposes the impact of your changes. And then you can just write normal asserts on that. For the database example, maybe you have a helper function deciding which database to query, and you can write tests directly for that function. And for the change to standard output, you could have the function return the string instead of just printing it. You can check it that way. Both of these changes can make it easier to verify that your code does what you want it to, and since you've changed it to be in the interface, it's less likely that something will unexpectedly change because you've made it part of the interface that you're testing. Now, I personally like path 2 more than path 1, but both of these are going to slow us down. If we'd thought about testing first, we maybe would have made the interface changes right away as part of the initial process. And I think it's easy to see how by tackling the interface changes right away, it would have been easier and faster than having to change them at the end when we've already done stuff. This is actually something I ran into recently with my deliberate practice app. If you want to learn more about the app, I've added a link to its repo and the YouTube playlist about it in the description below. So a key thing this application does is to store practice results to a file. Since I'm currently at the MVP stage, I figured I'd start by just writing the practice results directly to a file. Small little function. And as I started writing that code, I realized, how am I going to test this? Well, I guess I can just look at the output file and make sure it's exactly what I expect. It should be a small file, generally no big deal. But as I thought about that, I realized that's more of sort of an end-to-end integration kind of test, as opposed to just a unit test. It's helpful and good, but it's pretty heavy weight. And even in my MVP state, there's going to be quite a few different test cases I want to test. And I don't want them all to be sort of end-to-end things. So that made me realize, okay, instead of writing directly to a file, I should probably have a class, introduce practices, and also its friend, practice sets. And I can have them represent what I want to put to the file. And then instead of just opening the file and testing that the file looks exactly right, I can directly test practice and practice sets. I can make sure that they have the correct state at the correct times, and then I can have a small test for them that is just testing, okay, did I actually write the right values to files or not? All the tests are smaller and easier to understand. And that's how I got these classes, and the result module is much nicer now. One of the last PRs I worked on as part of this MVP had a similar issue. This time it was dealing with reading that summary file of results and showing it to the user. I'd initially planned on just opening file, computing the results, and printing them to the screen to show the user in a single small function. But like before, I realized it was going to be a pain to test. I could capture standard output, but again, that's more of an end-to-end test. It's important, but it shouldn't be how most of my tests are formed. So despite this being a small function, I ended up to create classes to hold this information. And as you can see, the change here got a little bigger. But then instead of only being able to test standard out, I was able to test all of the different components of it and sort of make sure, okay, is the activity key correct? Is the number of practice sets correct individually? So each test here is more focused on a single part instead of just a single string comparison, which I think resulted in better tests and better coverage. So I hope the next time you start working on a change, you spend some time right at the beginning working on the tests, or at least thinking about how you will test your code to ensure that you don't just write a good solution, but you write one that is verifiably good and easy to test. If you enjoyed this video, please consider hitting the like button below and subscribing. If you have any comments, code you'd like me to review, or ideas you'd like me to talk about, please leave a comment below or reach me at chris@seniorcodereviewbuddy.com. Thanks, and have a great day.